Well, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting us. I've been very impressed thus far with the leadership sessions. I actually was quite surprised when Michele invited me to attend. I've not been in healthcare other than the board of Piedmont, but I was really pleased. After I thought about it a while, I kind of thought about the farmer who entered his mule in the Kentucky Derby. And the day before the Derby, one of the other trainers came up and said, you know, I'm just kind of shocked. Do you have, in your wildest dreams, any hope of this mule winning the Kentucky Derby? The farmer said, not in the least, but I'm confident he will benefit from the association. So I'm confident, based upon the sessions thus far, that I have already benefited. You know, leadership really is crucial, and I couldn't be more delighted to see the focus and see what's being done, and having heard the presentations thus far across the healthcare industry. I think it really is an issue in every industry, and one that's been overlooked for far too long, and the efforts that have been put forth are, I would say, limp at best. I think there are a myriad of reasons that healthcare and other industries perhaps have not had the focus. Maybe first and foremost, I think, is a recognition that people are the foundation of virtually every business. And if you cannot be successful as a business unless your organization and the people that make up your organization have the skills, knowledge, confidence, and competence to perform their jobs well and understand the mission of the organization. And it requires top management commitment. The industry I was in, which was communications, historically had been controlled by engineers and accountants. And I don't know about healthcare. I assume it's probably the same. They're not necessarily the most people-friendly groups, nor do they have an understanding maybe of the dynamics of leadership in a competitive environment. And I think the last reason it's so hard is, as we've heard today from the other organizations, I think it really is hard work, and you've got to be willing to be committed, to spend time and money, but I'm confident, based upon the experience we had, as well as those that have related their stories today, that the returns are there. And I think one of the things is we forget about the metrics. There was a Gallup poll that was done about 10 years ago that basically, and I think we've all heard these statistics before, but basically said that 20% or 26% of the U.S. employees are fully engaged at any time. 19% on the other end of the spectrum are actively disengaged, and in ways that negatively impact their organizations. And they estimated the cost nationwide in 2001 of being in excess of $300 billion. And you also have the group in the middle that maybe aren't as engaged as they need to be. The kind of compelling story for us was that we had about a $6 billion payroll. And we took a step back and thought if we could improve the productivity of the organization just 1%, that was $60 million. And that was $60 million basically of pure profit. That's not the reason we necessarily wanted to do it, but nonetheless, those can be pretty compelling financials, and not even considering the improvement in terms of employee satisfaction and customer satisfaction. I also, speaking of customer satisfaction or patient satisfaction, I'm reminded of a quote from Tom Peters that says, if you place your customers first, in the case of healthcare patients, you need to place your employees more first, because they're the ones that are going to be taking care of your patients or your customers. So our history as a company, we were very satisfied with what we were doing in terms of leadership development. And I am going to get around to women in leadership. But we were pretty satisfied with it until we started hitting the wall when we were having some key management losses and really didn't have the leadership that was ready to step into some of those positions. And it occurred to us, much as some of the comments in earlier sessions, that while we had leadership dimensions and attributes, they really didn't have a lot to do with leading people. You know, they were good at they were maybe descriptive of things, managing things, but not leading people. And so we began a journey that said we had to turn that around. And that journey really got to the issue of the focus, the time, and attention we were placing on leadership development across the organization. I think we're all lulled into thinking somehow osmosis works, and good intentions will eventually create great leaders in an organization. And I think we all know that's not true, and that hope is really not a viable method for running an organization. So we put a very specific structure in place. I won't go into any details, as I sat and listened to a couple of the presentations that sounded very similar. And I do think that it sounds similar because regardless of the industry that any of us may be in, we have a common denominator, and that would be human beings. And good leadership, I would argue, is good leadership whether you're in the healthcare industry, the communications industry, the energy industry, or any other particular industry. As we were going through this process, Michele and I were engaged in conversations about leadership and leadership development, and more specifically, women in leadership positions. And we had a company that had very traditional organizational structures relative to gender. For those of you that are familiar with the telephone company or communications companies, if you were a man, you were a technician, and if you were a woman, you were either a service rep or an operator. And that began to change pretty dramatically in the 90s, but we weren't doing the types of things necessary to ensure that people that going into non-traditional positions were getting the kind of assistance and development that they needed. The real core, and the reason I started just leadership development, in my view, is the same whether it's a male or a female, man or woman. The issues that we saw, and I think the work we did, certainly raised the competence level for everyone. But then we got into the issue of confidence. And for those of you, and there are a number of women in the organization, you may be able to identify this with a newly minted division manager responsible for about 1,500 or 2,000 technicians. To stand up in front of that group at 7 o'clock in the morning can be pretty intimidating. And I'll tell you, it's pretty intimidating for a man to stand up in front of some of those people. So what we determined, and it really was an effort with the women in the organization, specifically our network organization, to develop what we call Women in Network, or WIN. And it had a very specific charter. There were very specific rules. It wasn't an organization simply to share trials and tribulations. It was really one to focus on development and learning. And there were really two, as I talked to all of the women that participated in it, there were really two, I think, key elements that really came out of that. The first of which was mentoring, knowing others that had had a little more experience in a particular role than you had. And the second was just networking. And the truth of the matter, that is something that's beneficial to all of us. I think all of us have been in a position that, we didn't know everything we needed to know, but we were too darn proud to ask. And by establishing the Women in Network, it created a network across our company that enabled them to have the freedom to say, I don't know, or I've got this problem or this situation, and have you had one similar to that, and the freedom to act. The success rate of this effort was pretty significant. Out of 26 general managers, within 3 years, 9 of them were women in those roles, which was a pretty dramatic transformation for us. And I might add that all 9 of them were in the top 50% of our results across the board. So, and I really attribute a great deal of that to this Women in Network program, which I really take no credit for. Actually, the women in our organizations were the one that convinced me to do it. A lot of these ideas we had stolen from other companies, and in the conversations Michele and I had had, she was starting a women in leadership effort at Piedmont Healthcare. And so she met with a lot of our women And much as we had stolen many of our ideas, she stole one or two of ours. So, Michele?
Thank you. Well, Rod mentions kind of his very distinguished career in people development. I'm a planning and business development person, and my intersection with the ideas around a women's leadership program began when my CEO said to me pretty clearly in early 2005, "You're the only woman in senior management, fix that." So after giving that a little bit of thought and reaching out to some of the other directors and vice presidents, female, in the organization, we started casting about for inspiration. And that's when Rod and Bell South were kind enough, and I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to learn from their experience. What I'm going to tell you a little bit about, and this really summarizes what Rod said about Women in Network, specifically their program. I'll draw you to the group must be well structured and had a charter. I think left to our own devices, we would have created a book club and some evening events and maybe done a Habitat for Humanity house. What we learned from the experience of others, and the other thing that we found that was very interesting is most of the evolved outside of healthcare organizations in Atlanta had similar initiatives, affinity groups of all kinds throughout their organization. Not so much in healthcare, which amazes me because 84% of our workforce is female. But at least at Piedmont, I don't know if this mirrors your organizations, but as you rise up the ranks, the women become fewer and fewer to where at the senior leadership group, I was the only female. So the opportunity was to create something really distinctive for the organization, but what we learned from Bell South and their experience was we put a very comprehensive planning process in place. We reached out throughout the organization and chartered a group of women who would come together and help us do this work. We have a very, very specific set of bylaws that govern that organization because we wanted to be sure that if another affinity group would come along, it would have a business purpose, very clear goals and expectations. What we call the Women's Leadership Alliance at Piedmont is governed by a board. That board has representatives from across our healthcare system. It has a program chair, and most importantly, it has a metrics chair. So we have a person who charts what we accomplish for the year and is very diligent in tracking every hour we spend and what we spend doing, and I'll show you some of that. I have a copy of our fiscal year 12 annual report for you when we finish. But the idea is, the intent of this organization is to further the business purpose of Piedmont Healthcare and to support women growing in their confidence and competence to be better leaders for our organization. So today we have 1,700 members. We started with 3. We had a 20% growth in fiscal year 12. We sponsored and developed 3 Toastmasters clubs. Has anybody ever been to a Toastmasters club? I spoke at one recently and was frankly daunted by the rigor that they put into training people to be certified as Toastmasters. I'd have to tie my hands behind my back and speak very differently than I do. And we've just completed our 3rd class of mentoring. I will tell you it took us 3 years to develop a mentoring program. And much like the rigor that we put into the development of the Women's Leadership Alliance, we spent a lot of time thinking about how to choose mentees, how to choose mentors. And one of the things that we did that I'm really proud of is that we have mentor coaches that actually coach our mentors during the year. Because as you know, it's probably much more challenging to be a mentor than to be a mentee. Even all the burden of work falls on the mentee, The mentor is an incredibly powerful and influential position in that relationship and needs to be able to do that successfully. So what we do really rests on these pillars. We certainly want to have the opportunity to have social interaction. And as Rod and I were talking outside the room, one of the things that's happened through the Leadership Alliance is between the board interaction, the mentorship committees, the programming committees, we're bringing women together throughout our 10,000 employee group in 5 hospitals and a variety of physician organizations. We're bringing people together who never would have been together before. And they're forming unique peer groups that we would not have had otherwise. Communication skills are vitally important. That's where the Toastmasters come from, and all the other forms of communication that they do. We encourage a lot of networking, not only internal to the organization, but in the community. We've been very involved, and one of the requirements of any affinity group within Piedmont is a community focus. The Women's Leadership Alliance has had several. They've sponsored and worked with Dress for Success. They've worked with Girls on the Run, which is a great program in our community that encourages running in young women for fitness and for fun. And we have sponsored a number of their events. We raised, we donated 855 pounds of sneakers to Green Sneakers to be sent around the world to young women through Girls on the Run that don't have shoes. So a lot of focus on community service and then leadership development. And a lot of our professional events that happen throughout the year with speakers and opportunities for interaction with women leaders in the community are focused on leadership development. So that's what we do in each of those areas. Our mentoring program certainly moves leadership development forward. You can see the rest of this. But that's really our slate of activities for the year. And we reward our members. We have a unique pin that has the Women Leadership Alliance logo. And gems sit on that pin, or actually dangle from that pin, and you get those gems for your activities within the organization, for attendance, for certain leadership positions that you hold within the Women's Leadership Alliance. And those have become quite the coveted gems in our organization. We're really proud of what we've done over the last 5 years, and all of the events, both internal and external in our organization, that have resulted in our women being in the community, being active, not just at Piedmont, but being active throughout the greater metropolitan Atlanta area. That's how we spend our time. We track every event. We track what our women do outside. Today, we'll add another little tiny piece to that eminence slice, because I was able to share with you what we're doing in the organization. So when women leaders in our organization stand on podiums, we have the opportunity to track that as a benefit to the organization. But as you can see, the majority of what we spend our time in is leadership development. I think the best, and I will tell you about an event that we held recently. We budget $50,000 a year for this program across our organization. We don't always spend it all. In years where we've struggled a little bit with our budget as a system, or as we were starting out, we would spend less than that. And we try to partner with community organizations to help us do a variety of events. This is a great, Omega is standing in front of a Belk sign. We partnered with Belk for an evening program on Dress for Success in the workplace. One of the challenges that clinical organizations have, of course, is that as women rise through the ranks, learning to dress appropriately to their position can be a challenge. And so Belk was kind enough to partner with us and take the board members, so Omega is a board member, to take the board members from our organization and use them as the models on the runway. And we had a great opportunity to reinforce things like closed open-toed shoes, skirt lengths, neckline depths, in our women that evening to not only demonstrate great dress for the workplace, but the interesting thing was several of these women had never envisioned themselves in the clothes that they were wearing that evening. So it certainly benefited Belk because we had the opportunity to all shop together that night, and we had about 150 women there to see the event, and then we had participants. But this is one of our success stories. I don't think there's anything that quite speaks to the success of an organization as the people that it touches, and I thought you might remember a story rather than a number. And so Omega was a staff nurse really struggling with what her next step in the organization was. She entered and was selected in our mentoring program, and as it says there, flourished. She's now an informatics coordinator and is one of the vice presidents, so she represents one of our entities. Each of our entities has a vice president on the board. And so Omega, I wouldn't be surprised to see her run in the running for the presidency for the Women's Leadership Alliance in the next couple of years. We also have a very active and robust website that displays across our intranet banner and provides women with upcoming events, the opportunity to vote for our slate of nominees when we have elections yearly, and also keeps them informed about key issues that might relate to women in the workplace. And then Laura Kavanaugh also is a graduate of both the mentoring program and the goal-setting workshop. We try to provide in some of our interactions the opportunity to learn very specific skills, and we've done a lot around goal-setting and trying to help women assess where they are in their careers, what their attributes are, where they want to be, and the attributes that they need to get there. And so Laura is a graduate of the mentoring program and the goal-setting workshop, was promoted to a project manager for the implementation of our EPIC program, and is a WLA board member. She is actually our metrics chair. So she is the one that produces the annual report that talks about our Leadership Alliance. So in closing, and we'll have a minute or so for questions, I will tell you that without the inspiration from Rod and Bell South and the leadership in the WIN program there to help us put our feet on the path, we would have struggled, because as I mentioned, healthcare seems to not have embraced this concept as readily as other industries have. And so we're proud of the work that these women have done. The idea that Tim asked me, or the original thoughts that I had when faced with the challenge to fix the problem, were nothing compared to what the women of the Women's Leadership Alliance have created over the last 5 years. So I'm very proud of all of them for getting us to the point where we are today, and we would be happy to answer questions for you. Yes.
Well, this is very exciting. It sounds like you've done great work. How do you keep 1,700 members engaged throughout your program or your...
So it's a challenge. We do a lot of our events we simulcast, or we do individually at each of the hospitals. So there's kind of almost a little club within a club at particularly each of the hospitals. It's easier to engage them than at the physician sites. But the vice president in that area and the program chair work very hard to get their members out to participate in events. And they'll do community service events locally in addition to the events that we do across the system. And then I think our website is a really powerful tool to that, because we have a lot of opportunity for women to exchange ideas, books, things that they're doing just offline from the events that the organization sponsors that they might be doing in their local communities that women can engage in. But it is a challenge to keep everybody engaged across the system, particularly when you can be an hour and a half apart.
Do you use social media at all?
You know, I'm sure they do. I am a little bit of a social media curmudgeon. So I don't know the answer to whether they're using Facebook or not, because I don't. But I'll find out about that. That's a very good question. Yes.
Do you know what the organizational impact has been of having more women in leadership roles?
The interesting part for us is that we have not tracked that as well as we want to do in the future. We just installed PeopleSoft. So two things that we'll be doing in the future. We are looking right now, we're doing a pretty deep data dive to understand the 5-year impact of the organization, to look at both the retention of women in the organization and, frankly, as women have left, where they've gone. Because one of the challenges is when you teach women and anyone in the organization to become more competent, of course you make them more ready for the next move, internal and external to the organization. So that's work we're going to be doing. There's a big hook that's going to come out, but I would be happy to chat with you at the break. So thank you, and we have these for you in the back.